Whispers reverberated in the halls of Buckingham Palace. Whispers that something was seriously amiss. Behind the splendor of royal existence, a silent disintegration had set in. Within those gates, things were happening that could reshape all the world thought it knew of the modern monarchy. The tale started, as all royal tales do, with reassurance. Official declarations outlined stability and recuperation. Smiles were practiced, calendars shaved, and hands waved obediently for the cameras. But behind the groomed moves, the reality could not be concealed. King Charles, his mind and body once so sharp and aglow, had weakened. The sickness he'd silently fought for so long was catching up with him. Exhaustion seeped into his days. Memory loss interrupted his thoughts, and spells of collapse sent dread pulsating through those around him. In the palace, so masterful in the art of managed messaging, quiet crisis had set in. The staff was abuzz with word of canceled appointments, lost notes, and an unspoken anxiety. The king's commanding presence was waning, and what kept him most disturbed was not merely his frailty, but his confusion and terror when he forgot even mundane facts. Under the veneer of ceremony existed a fragile world resting on silence. Each appearance was choreographed not to project majesty, but to conceal vulnerability. Behind closed doors, Charles struggled to keep pace, forgetting, faltering mid-sentence, insisting he was well enough to work when his body betrayed him. Those moments never reached the public eye, but they haunted his aides and family. In private, they watched him grip the arms of his chair to steady himself as the world seemed to spin. In this vulnerable position, the seeds of transformation took root. Monarchy, rooted in tradition, endures by continuity. And when continuity fails, its machinery comes to life. Operation Regency, the age-old procedure, guarantees that when the monarch is unable to act, the heir takes over unobtrusively. No declarations, no ritual, simply the creeping shift of power, subtle at first, a stroke here, an ascent there, before the transition becomes irrevocable. But before any official action was taken, something much more human was done. One quiet night, in a private study lined with portraits of the ancestors, King Charles sat down with his eldest son. No cameras, no advisors, just a father and his heir, bound by duty and love. With shaking hands, Charles handed William a sealed envelope containing 5 simple words. "Now it's your turn, son." It was a blessing and a surrender, the instant that a father surrendered to time. Everything started changing from that night on. William, the longtime icon of stability and public optimism, started stepping outside of appearances. Decisions started passing through his office. Meetings previously chaired by his father were now his. Without fanfare, the weight of the crown fell upon his shoulders. Staff started calling him sir. Correspondence to the throne involved his sanction. Invites previously extended to Charles and Camilla now went to William and Catherine. The transition had started not out of ambition, but needs. Friends of William referred to his ascension as reluctant and agonizing. He understood the price public life exacted, but he could not do otherwise. The monarchy could not afford a power vacuum. Under the discreet hand of Operation Regency, William became the functional heart of the crown. Meanwhile, Charles discovered a peculiar calm. In his last months of active reign, he became thoughtful, focused less on power and more on coherence. His illness had stripped the royal form away, revealing only that which truly mattered: family, legacy, and preservation of the institution his mother had left to him. When Charles faced the public, his movements were slower, his speeches brief, but his eyes still had warmth. The quiet dignity of a man who cared for his country, his family, and his duty. Behind the scenes, he gave advice to William, letting go slowly, his relationship with his son maturing into an unspoken rhythm of comprehension. But as the monarchy made its accommodations to its new world, things simmered just below the surface. The palace, ever a fragile tapestry of pride and hierarchy, wrestled to fit in, especially with Camilla's increasing autonomy, making power tricky to balance. But even as the royal family teetered at its crossroads, a king in decline, a son ascending to fate, and a letter to reverberate throughout history. Behind the gilded doors, the monarchy was fraying and reforming itself simultaneously. And in its center, that single letter, neither command nor decree, but the last gesture of trust from a father, hung there. 5 shaking words that shifted the course of history. "Now it's your turn, son." William read the letter by himself, away from the cameras, away even from Catherine. Insiders afterwards said he sat in silence for hours after, looking at the page until the ink appeared to blur. It was more than a letter. It was the instant the weight of the crown, centuries old, passed on to the next generation. Charles had always been one who believed in preparation. For years, he had handled his son unobtrusively through the tangled web of royal obligation, duty, diplomacy, ritual, restraint. But nothing could have prepared either of them for the day that preparation turned into reality. The illness of the king had progressed far more quickly than anyone within the palace would admit to in public. Over the past few months, Charles had become weak, dependent on attendance, more and more isolated. What started as a controllable diagnosis now devoured his stamina, granting him sporadic glimpses of lucidity interspersed with confusion and fatigue. The letter was a curse and a blessing for William. It granted him permission to lead, but proclaimed a devastating reality. His father no longer expected him to recover. Duty blurred into grief. Every time William emerged in front of the public, smiling and shaking hands with photographers, he bore the unspoken awareness that he was already, in reality, if not name, the monarch. Nevertheless, to the world, King Charles held sway. That tenuous equilibrium of continuity and decay was the palace's best-kept secret. Behind closed doors, the advisors started quietly to prepare the handover. Documents were shifted from Charles's desk to William's. Meetings were reorganized, signatures farmed out, authority diverted through back channels. The transition was so seamless that even top government officials didn't notice at first. But inside the palace, everyone did. The king's private secretary now answered directly to William's staff. Schedules were cleared out, state visits reallocated. Power was being wielded, just not by the monarch himself. Even as William stepped into the abyss, Charles was acutely conscious of all change. On good days, he called on his son for long, tearful chats, half mentorship, half goodbye. He talked of duty and sacrifice, of the way that the crown was not a badge of authority, but of resilience. He spoke of regrets, that he had not been understood, that his attempts to modernize the monarchy were fought tooth and nail. He encouraged William to wait, but not to be afraid to question convention, to recall that compassion, not command, was the real test of being a king. At one such session, sources claim, Charles produced a small leather box on his desk. The photograph inside, a yellowed picture of himself as a boy sitting next to his late mother, the Queen. "She kept it until the day she passed away," he said quietly. "Put on your desk." William didn't say a word, but those who were there remembered him as visibly upset. It wasn't the picture itself that undid him. It was the symbolism, the passing not of something, but of something passed down. But the palace is a building where feeling is both inevitable and forbidden. Even as father and son had these moments together, the machinery of monarchy continued to grind. Charles was powerless to halt the state calendar, though increasingly William performed his duties. He started accompanying weekly briefings, signing important documents, and attending the crown at official events. To the outside world, he was dutiful Prince of Wales, keeping a sick father going. Within the palace, he was already performing the functions of king. The transition tested him. William, ever cautious and calculated, now bore tremendous pressure. Every step was observed, every utterance measured against centuries of precedent. But those who knew him said that his poise was remarkable. He did not command by bombast, but by steely resolve. Listen, learn, decide with the same steady certitude that had characterized his mother's elegance and his father's resilience. Nevertheless, keeping the royal family united was not easy. Charles's declining health created not just a void of power, but of steadiness. The staff's loyalty started to crack. Camps were created, some in Camilla's favor, others in William's. Rumors abounded of scheduling quarrels, priority clashes, and public appearance conflicts. The formerly tightly structured palace now seemed fragmented. In the midst of it all, the letter, the solitary folded piece of paper that started it all, remained William's unifying icon. It reminded him that this was not a rebellion or coup, but a continuation. His father had not been deposed, but had surrendered the torch willingly, in pain. There was honor in it, and William was resolute to keep it. But the weight was so great. There were nights, Aide said, when he came back from functions and sat silently outside his father's office. The public observed a self-assured air. In private, he was a son watching his father disintegrate. Charles's health continued to deteriorate. His physicians demanded rest, but he remained determined to have briefings and short meetings, desperate to still have purpose. "If I stop, I disappear," he supposedly informed one aide. But the deterioration was inexorable. Even the shortest of meetings exhausted him. Ultimately, his finest act of leadership was an act of humility. Entrusting the monarchy, he had dedicated his life into his son's hands. It was service and relinquishment rather than power. A decision made not out of weakness, but out of love for family, for legacy, for the lasting symbol of the crown. Since that day, William no longer walked in the shadow of his father. He bore it, and with it, the optimism of a country ready for a new beginning. His subtle assumption of power started nearly imperceptibly. There was no declaration, no balcony scene, no televised ritual. Only a chain of little, carefully orchestrated moves that slowly molded the pace of the monarchy. To the outside world, it appeared he was simply assisting his father. Inside Buckingham Palace, everyone recognized a handover had begun. Operation Regency, a plan written decades ago for just this moment, was secretly put into practice. Its intent was continuity. When the monarch was no longer able to carry out royal duties, the heir would step in surreptitiously, keeping things going without disturbing the appearance of business as usual. For William, it translated to endless days of meetings, briefings, and consultations, all under the specter of secrecy. Public pronouncements continued to mention the king, but the choices gradually carried William's signature. Initially, he did not like to move with absolute power. Having seen his father bear the weight of the crown for all those years, he was aware of how burdensome it was, even if not evident. But the moment had arrived. He started showing up at state conferences once out of reach of the king, in the same seat, addressing the same counselors, only with a surer, quieter intent. People reported that the discussions became briefer, more intense, more intentional. Palace officials noted a shift in tone. Humility over hierarchy. William eschewed anything that bordered on usurpation, couching each decision as in service of the king's wishes, maintaining the facade of continuity, while subtly moving the monarchy in new directions. His own leadership was quiet but unambiguous. Those who had served Charles for years automatically started yielding to William. In the meantime, Charles's strength waned. Full briefings were replaced by abbreviated summaries. Frequently,